Hey, Alec Miller here, founder of Royals and Rogues, and today I want to talk about empathy. So before we jump into this topic about empathy, I just came in from a walk with my wife, and it was kind of chilly outside. So we looked at the temperature, and it said, low 60s, but it said it felt like it was in the 50s. And I've always wondered about this whole feels like thing, right? Like, is there a guy that does that, right? Is there somebody that walks outside and they're like, feels like this, and they tell it to like all the news and weather stations? Or is there like a scientific measurement, right? Where it's like, if you factor in the clouds over their head and then add in the wind chill factor, then it's like, it feels like whatever. I've always wondered, but I got it just right. I guessed how much it felt like, and it said that's what it feels like. And so that makes me wonder, like, could I be the feels like guy? Could I be the guy that calls all the weather channels and tells them what it, anyway. So empathy, it's an incredibly powerful tool that we have at our disposal as creatives. And it's one of those things where it's becoming a buzzword, right? Or I should say it has become a buzzword. It's a really popular term to throw around, and it's kind of this catch-all that people use. But today, I kind of want to coin a term, and I'm known as being a contrarian, and I'm leaning into it rather than leaning away from it. So the term I want to coin is pseudo-empathy. Now, I think it's a really important to understand, first off, what empathy is and how powerful it can be. I'm not going to go through a whole TED Talk on it, but more or less, empathy is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and feel what they would be feeling in that circumstance or from their point of view, right? It's taking yourself out of your limited scope and point of view and putting yourself in someone else's point of view. And here I'm smacking my mic. So what that does is can really open your eyes to things you didn't see before. It's really, really valuable in the creative industry, but especially in the tech industry and video game industry, which is industries I work very closely with. Most of my clients are either Fortune 500 tech companies or mid-sized game companies. And so it's something I'm really familiar with, is this idea of empathizing with the consumer, with the user, and especially when it comes to like UI, UX stuff, which is user interface and user experience design. So empathy is one of these things that's earned its place in the discussion, right? That it's a really valuable tool, and it takes away, the amount of guesswork essentially we do to try to figure out what someone's wanting or not wanting. And it reveals, kind of like what the last video I talked about, which is why before the how, it can reveal a lot of things that we weren't necessarily considering when we first went into solve this problem, right? Or create something that someone has to use. By being empathetic, by putting ourselves in someone else's mindset, by walking, a mile in their shoes, you can really start to appreciate the nuances that you missed when you originally went to design this. Things that seemed obvious are no longer obvious. But what I've noticed creep in and is kind of needs to be, I think a light needs to be shined on, while everyone's sitting here praising empathy, is this practice of pseudo-empathy. Now, pseudo-empathy is a lot like pseudoscience. Science is another fantastic tool that we have at our disposal. It's a scientific method, right? It's the idea of having a hypothesis, then testing that hypothesis, and then trying to recreate your results. And then after you can recreate them at a small amount, recreating them at scale, and then being able to test that in different scenarios to make sure it's true, right? Or as true as it can be. Sorry for the interruption here. My camera malfunctioned and I don't feel like re-recording that intro because I think it was pretty decent and funny, if I do say so myself. So we're going to roll right along with the rest of this video, and I'm going to act like nothing happened and I didn't take my jacket off because it was warm. Here we go. So science is a really beautiful tool that we have, and being able to test stuff and find out what's true or not true is incredibly useful to us as a society. But there's this thing that popped up called pseudoscience. And the issue with pseudoscience is it masquerades as science while not actually being scientific. And I'm not going to give any modern examples of this, but there's plenty of examples right now that we see. In fact, in some ways, I'd argue you almost see more pseudoscience than actual science being thrown out, especially when it comes to things like dieting and among those sorts of worlds. We see a lot of things that just, don't have the data because people don't want to do the data, or because it's being skewed or funded by the wrong sources. And therefore, we have kind of a lot of non-scientific resources available to us that aren't properly doing the right steps, right? They're not doing enough. Like one of the things I've noticed a lot in a lot of scientific papers, because I'm a cool guy and I like to spend most of my time reading white papers. It's a weird thing that I do, but a lot of them you'll see these trends of, people using self-reporting. You see people using very small sample sizes, or sample sizes from one demographic, and not really getting a good enough or wide enough spread. But you have things, here's a safe one, okay? Here's a safe one. You'll have things like the flat earth, right, which will come up, and they'll use scientific methods, right? They'll say, well, if gravity does, pulls downward, then, why don't things roll around, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, I get what you're saying, but it's not scientific, right? You guys aren't doing broad enough studies. It's mostly anecdotal evidence masquerading as science, right? Well, I can't see the curve of the earth, and therefore it's not curved. And it's like, okay, well, that's not necessarily true. It's just very big. And so it doesn't look like a basketball is curved if you zoom in far enough and look over the horizon, just because it's too big, right? So that's what pseudoscience is. I think we all kind of know what pseudoscience is. But pseudo-empathy isn't a term that's really been coined yet. And I'm hoping to coin it here. I'm hoping a whole bunch of people start using it in their own lives. You don't have to credit me. Just start using it. Start calling things out as pseudoscience, or pseudo-empathy, I should say, whenever you see it. So what is pseudo-empathy? We should, be safe about practicing calling out things as pseudo-empathy, right? We don't want to do the same thing once again that sort of happened with science, where people kind of call any science they don't like pseudoscience, and science they do like actual science. And it's something that's kind of a pet peeve of mine when it comes to the science thing, is a whole lot of people that just kind of throw out like, I love science. And it's like, well, you can't really love science because it's a methodology, not a noun. But I digress. And getting on to pseudo-empathy. So pseudo-empathy is when somebody is acting as though they're practicing empathy without running through all the proper steps, or trying to practice empathy in a space that they can't practice it in. Empathy is powerful, but it has its limits. So there are a few warning signs for when you can kind of see if someone's practicing pseudo-empathy. And so the number one warning sign for me is when someone doesn't do their homework. Empathy is a very powerful tool, but it doesn't mean you get to get away with not doing the work, the legwork, right? The research, figuring out the context, figuring out who it is that you're actually needing to empathize with, figuring out what their context is, where they live, where they're at, what they're going through in life, right? You need to ask a lot of questions. And I find a lot of people want to skip straight to empathy because it's so powerful and not do the work. You still have to do homework. You still have to test your product to make sure it's good. You have to test it to make sure it's going to work, that it's enjoyable. You might empathize and say, like, this group wants this sort of a product, but if your product doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do, it doesn't matter how empathetic you are in the world, it failed. So that's one I see a lot, is people trying to skip to empathy and not actually do the hard work, right? The next thing is, and this is a really, really common one, and I might get some pushback on this. So let me know in the comments if you disagree, because I'm not right about everything all the time. This is just my observation. This is pseudoscience, right? This isn't a scientific method. This is me anecdotally telling you what I see as pseudo-empathy. But this next one is a pretty big one, which is you can't empathize with everyone at once. You can only empathize with one person at a time. When I work with my clients, I have them choose one target demographic. I have them choose one individual person that they need to make up in their head that we're going to try to meet, right? We're going to try to meet this person. And you can come up with multiple, is my cat. You can come up with multiple personas, right? But each one needs to be met with a different answer, with a different solution. You're not going to make one ad that meets everybody. This is where you get those Pepsi ads, right? You get the Pepsi ad that's like, we're going to end world hunger and war by giving you a Pepsi. And it's like, no, Target ads are another one that I don't really enjoy watching. It's just like a bunch of people running around in a white psych background, smiling as the Target symbol shows up and they buy things. And then the grandpa waves and, abuela waves. And, you have this dog runs up and the kid hugs it. And it's like, this isn't an ad. This is just a bunch of people smiling and then your logo. So the same thing with tech, right? This is a big problem with YouTube and Twitter, is you cannot make everybody happy all at the same time, and you cannot empathize with more than one person, because that unique person, the power of empathy is putting yourself into an individual's mindset and seeing how they feel the world and realizing that they react to things differently than you might react to things. You can't do that with a bunch of different people all at once. You just can't. It's physically impossible to look through more than one pair of eyes at the same time. And that's a big problem. Now, chances are individuals have a lot of shared experiences, right? So by putting yourself in one person's shoes, you can solve many people's problems. I'm not saying that you can only solve one person's problem at a time. But what I am saying, though, is if someone's telling you that they're going to try to empathize with a group, or that they are empathizing with, like 5 or 6 different demographics, that's not empathy. That's guesswork. That's a lot of assumptions. And it's simply trying to appease a crowd. You cannot empathize with more than one person at a time. Now, again, that might solve more than one person's problems, because a lot of people have the same problems, but you're going to have to empathize with one individual at a time, not a crowd. And for now, the third most common way I see people practicing pseudo-empathy, there's many, many more, but I'm going to stick to 3, I think, for now. We'll see, night's still young. But the third way I see people using pseudo-empathy is by stretching the limits of empathy. Empathy is an incredibly powerful tool. It's really, really valuable, but it has its limits. There are types of people and certain groups of people that I can't empathize with. And the reason why I can't empathize with them isn't because I don't care, or I'm callous, or I'm cruel. It's because I do not have any shared lived experience to base my empathy on. And in fact, the empathy becomes ego. It becomes egotistical for me after a certain point to look at somebody that is so different from me and me to be like, I can guess how you feel. I can pretend to put myself into your shoes, and I'm going to know what it feels like to be you. I'm going to imagine my way into your life. And even if I ask a ton of questions, even if I do a bunch of stuff, I can't. A good example for me of this are like women that are 9 months pregnant, right? It's somebody that like I've never had an experience even close to that. I don't know what it's like to live with any of this. I don't have any of the parts that you have that you needed to make that baby. Like, I don't have any way to form in a short amount of time the experiences needed to draw on in order to put myself in your shoes. Instead, I just have to listen and be humble and listen and ask questions when appropriate. But mostly I just need to listen and be humble. So that's where I am with pregnant women. Maybe there's some training I could get. Maybe if I practice for a long amount of time and talk to enough different people and did some exercises, I could get close enough to push myself to a point where maybe I could empathize. But just out of the gate with the current experience I have as a 30-year-old dude that's pretty much been dude his whole life without many experiences that have challenged that, it'd be egotistical of me to suddenly jump into a woman's shoes that's 9 months pregnant and say, I can feel what you feel and I know what you're going through. The same thing for, people that have experienced, racism their entire life, or have grown up in a country that I just haven't been around. Thankfully I've traveled a bit. I've been to some third world countries. I've lived in different countries for months at a time, and it's really broadened my horizons. If I hadn't had those experiences, I'd be even more limited than I am now. So this brings me to kind of my fourth thing, which is you need more experiences. You can only empathize with people that you've had a shared experience with, or you have a jumping off point, right? You have to have a point of Here's where I can start to see the world as the way you see it. And this is one of the big problems with, America as a whole right now, not just politically, but there's so many people that just have been living in such different worlds that they have a really hard time even jumping off into empathy. The more you travel, the more you experience different cultures, different, social, economical stratums, the more you get out of your comfort zone, the more ability you're going to have to be empathetic, and the more ability you're going to have to empathize, because you have to have a taste of that, right? You have to live a little bit of it. It's something I was really shocked to find out when I lived in India for 6 months, and I tried to raise money for children that needed beds. They didn't have any beds. It was a free school. Technically, it's an orphanage, but it's illegal to open an orphanage. At least it was at the time. And so they had to have a free school that these kids lived and stayed at. But they slept on the ground because they didn't have any money. And so I was trying to raise money for them, and it was so real to me because I had spent a night on the floor sleeping at this school, and it was like, this is horribly uncomfortable. This is miserable. I don't know how any of these kids wake up in the morning, at 7 a.m. and get homework done when they've been sleeping on the ground all night. But when I brought it back to the States, there just wasn't that empathy. People just didn't have the experience. And most of the people where I was going to try to get people involved, it was like so foreign to them. And it was like, well, why can't they just have beds? Like, I don't get the problem. It's fine. It's just, it's like, well, because they don't have the money. And so I need to get the money from you to give it to them so they can get the beds. And it was one of the things where at first I was really mad at people, but now looking back, having grown more, it's like, oh, they just didn't have that ability, And I tried some stuff. I tried making a video and some other things to show the circumstances to create that empathy. But the realistic thing is, like, if you don't have any sort of shared overlap with somebody, you can't empathize, and it's egotistical to try, in my opinion. It doesn't mean you can't try to listen. It doesn't mean you can't try to, figure out how to get the experience that will let you bridge that gap. But if you don't have the experience, just be honest. Just be honest. It's like, I don't know. I can't empathize. I never experienced this before. It's out of my league. It'd be like me trying to, perform a surgery on somebody without any training. It's like, this is outside of my abilities. Like, I can do basic trauma. I can do basic CPR. I've been certified, but like, you want me to jump up to this next level, I need something to go off of, and I don't even have the tools to know what to look for to start. So that's the next level of pseudo-empathy. I don't plan on having all these videos be negative, but this is one that I think was really important right now, as I see a lot of people using this, and it's great. I don't think anyone should avoid using empathy, but I think we should be aware as we see it in the world, not to let people get away, especially if you're in a boardroom scenario where someone's like, oh yeah, we want to empathize with the user, and then they go on to list like 5 different users. It's like, I'm sorry, that's not going to work, or if you, want to use it as a tool and are wondering why something's not working out the way it is. It's like, or someone once again wants to skip doing the homework. It's like, we don't need to do all that research. We're just going to have a empathy meeting where we try to think through what would be the right thing to do for these clients or for this demographic. And the answer is like, no, you need to sit down and really think through this and do the homework and get some studies done, but then also combine that with empathy. Yeah, so that's the term I'm hoping to coin, is pseudo-empathy. I have a feeling that this video might rub some people the wrong way, but I think I've given enough caveats throughout it that maybe not. Also, probably only 10 people will watch it, so, harm no foul, right? If you are one of those 10 people, I really appreciate it. Stick around. There's going to be a ton more content coming up. I'm trying to stick with this Blogsemper, whatever it is. Probably won't get something out every day, but I'm going to try. And I'm trying to be more vulnerable, trying to make more jokes. Who knows? So that was why pseudo-empathy needs to be watched out for and called out, and what some ways you might notice that it exists. And I've been Alec Miller, founder of Rolls and Rogues, and I'll see you in the next one.